Michael Kelker, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
It is great to be here.
Michael, you acquired a pallet manufacturer.
Yep.
You did so in your 40s with a family of 3 kids and your wife. So this was a mid-career pivot, and I love such stories.
Yeah.
Let's hear yours and learn about the pallet business. Please start us off with some background on you, Michael.
Sure. Born and raised in New Jersey, and actually lived out there for all my life until I went to college. Went to college at the University of Scranton. Got my psychology degree, and I did like anybody else with a psychology degree. I went into something that wasn't psychology. Went into IT for a couple of years, working in New York, which was great. Got an opportunity to live abroad for a year in London, which was awesome. By that point, I kind of knew I didn't want to do technology anymore. And I had some really good mentors that would be like, you'd be good to get an MBA. So I went and got my MBA from Georgetown, go Hoyas, McDonough School of Business. And between my first and second year, conventional MBA, traditional, and to my first and second year, I got an internship at Pratt & Whitney, the aircraft engine manufacturer up in, Hartford, Connecticut. And I went and I did that for the summer. And I said, this was everything I wanted it to be. I love manufacturing. I love being able to touch and make and influence stuff. When I was in the technology side, I kind of had that feeling. And sometimes, like if you turn off the server, I don't know if anybody cares. But this is like I was helping on the jet engine that powers the F-22, for example. On a project I had, I'm like, this is amazing. I'm keeping America safe, or this is a real thing. It flies. Aviation's awesome. So at a business school, I went into a leadership development program at Pratt & Whitney. Stayed there for about 5 or 6 years, did a variety of different functional roles, all, kind of service and manufacturing related, bounced around a few more years. And what I found, and some of it honestly is probably me, but I worked for a few years at a position. I do really well for a year or two. And then after that, I realized now it was probably me. Started losing focus, wasn't the same. Time to move on. Every time we moved on, we moved again. So there I was sitting in the Quad Cities, which is right on the Mississippi, between Illinois and Iowa, living on the Iowa side and working at the airport on the Illinois side. And it was time to move on. And I told my wife, and I said, I want to do this crazy thing I've been talking about forever and see if there's a company I can buy. And she said, do we not have to move again? And I said, maybe not. And she said, that's enough for me. Let's try it. So, then I started my search.
Let me stop you there, Michael. So a couple follow-up questions. First of all, on Georgetown, did you know that the annual ETA conference co-hosted by Georgetown, UVA, and Duke, I believe, CETA, I think it's pronounced, Southeastern ETA conference, is going to be hosted at Georgetown in September this year?
Yeah, I did. And I thank you for reminding me. I wish this was a thing when I was in school. I graduated in 2006. It was just getting started. And I don't know if at that time it would have been right for me. I mean, the leadership development program and some other stuff I did was so instrumental to kind of the business leader that I am today, and the pivot between industries and everything else. But boy, had I known about this, I don't know, 10, 15 years earlier, I probably would have actually jumped in earlier. So I'm happy to give back any way I can.
Well, I'll be there on a panel. So if you do end up going there, we'll get the chance to meet in person. Yeah. I'm just across the water here in Arlington. Great.
Awesome.
And then, Michael, you said that you presented this to your wife, this crazy thing I've been talking about for years. I want to do it now. So if you didn't learn about it as an MBA or in business school, when had you learned about it? ETA.
So there was a gentleman that worked for me who's since become a really good friend, who I realize now that I've educated myself more on the lingo and stuff, that he ended up searching for a company and he ended up buying it as an independent sponsor for a lower middle market private equity company. So he partnered with them, And he opened my eyes on that this was even a thing. By this point, the reason we met each other and actually worked really closely together is I was running a facility for a private equity owned company. As a general manager, and he was my director of operations. So I moved on from there. He ran the plant for a few years, and then he ended up doing a search and partnering as an independent sponsor with a different private equity company. So I forget exactly how it happened, but we were talking. I'm like, what are you doing now? He's like, I just bought a company and now I'm a CEO. And I'm like, how did you do that? And he's like, Mike, I've worked with you. He's like, you could do this. And so we just started talking. His name's Luis Coriano. Fantastic dude. He's doing more of the private equity route. Obviously I ultimately became a self-funded searcher through an SBA. So there's a lot of reasons that we're doing it sort of differently. But he was the mentor that went and said, here's how you find companies that can work. Hey, he sent out the traditional letters to try to, prospecting and get interest. And he really helped me on my way, and I would not be where I am, without his help. And he needs to hear it if he hasn't already, right?
Great. You hear that, Luis? Yeah. We thank you. And when you say, Michael, that you went the SBA self-funded route and he went the kind of private equity independent sponsor route, just differentiate that for us and kind of why you think he did that and you did something else. Let's hear about this kind of these differences in flavor of buying a business.
So when you really get down to the core of it, for me, it was very much about control. And that's one thing that when you're working with a private equity company, in my experience and everything I've heard and kind of my own personal experience, they are always going to retain the control because they're the one bringing the majority of the money and they're the ones doing the deal together, and they have the LPs and everything else. So because they're bringing all those resources, you can get a much bigger company. And you can own a piece of it. And if you're able to hit the targets and you're able to sell within that 5 to 7 year window that they typically want to see, with that huge growth curve and everything that can build value, if you're willing to do it and you're willing to put up with it, and you guys are all still agreeing and the board isn't fighting and all those other things that come along with it, you can do really well. You can make a lot of money. For me, I didn't want pressure to sell. I wanted control, and I was willing to get a much smaller company in order to make that happen, because I could bankroll myself and some of the resources and people that came in with me. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But by doing it, I'm the majority owner of the company. Nobody, unless I default to the bank, is ever going to force me to sell. Honestly, the way that it's all written, even some of my partners, they can be extremely unhappy with me. They can make my life miserable, but they have no legal control. So that was really important to me. It's like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to basically wager my family's happiness and security on doing this. I'm going to be in control. And so that's why I ultimately went the self-funded route. Not for nothing. It doesn't hurt that when I tried a traditional searcher PPM and get funded in the search mode, I had some great conversations with some great investors, all of which passed on me. So there may have been some of that too.
Well, I want to get to that in just a sec, because that is a big part of how you ended up on Self, as you just said, self-funded. Sure. Great. And then one, just kind of on your backstory, one other detail is that the idea of small business was something that was familiar and even romantic or sort of heritage for you, correct? Yeah. It's in your family? Yes. Say a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up again. So my mother's side of the family, my grandfather and his brothers had Swingle Manufacturing. They actually built diners, the old classic diner where you get breakfast 24 hours a day. And they started back in the late 40s, early 50s with the silver cars that you see. And went all the way up until the late 80s, early 90s, when they finally shut it down. So it was a tremendous amount of pride. And I do remember going with my dad, who was a salesperson in the company, over to the plant. And there's just something there's something about manufacturing and something about tangible goods that's just so important to me. And I can't describe it. It's kind of one of those, if you know kind of things. I can get excited about the idea of technology and software, but the reason I get excited about it is it helps me build real stuff. I could never see myself running an abstract, thought consultation type business. Unless again, it was focused on tangible stuff. It's just, for some reason, it's so compelling for me. And some of that is because of the background of the family. And my father, after doing the sales, for diners, once that business closed down, because he actually couldn't find a buyer. And I think that's part of what motivates me too, in some ways. But my dad went into remodeling and, additions and stuff for houses. So making stuff is just, I've just grown up that way. Even though my parents will tell you, I never really wanted to do the work, but I wanted to be in the process. So I guess that's why I'm in the management side now.
Well, it's interesting. You're the second interview. I guess, no, I've had one interview before this. So just before this airs, the week before this airs, Michael, will be Mike Day, who was very much an engineering kid, an engineering professional, and also this strong orientation toward physical products. And so when he went the tangible, and so when he went out looking for a business, he too insisted really that it be a manufacturing business, which is ultimately what he bought. So it is a personality type, it seems, if you will. He also happened to buy in his 40s, and he's called Michael. So the coincidences don't stop. But I think the only one that's really notable there is that you both
maybe
really,
it is the profile. Maybe
tangible.
It's in your 40s and you're Michael, and that's just the way it goes.
Let's circle back now. So you've said to your wife, "I would like to do this." She, as long as you don't have to move, and you said probably don't. She gave it your blessing.
I'll do my best.
Gave it her blessing. Do your best. And you proceed and you evaluate some of the options. You decide against the Luis path of independent sponsorship, quasi-private equity. You do consider traditional search, which actually, traditional search actually does look a lot like private equity. It arguably is a niche of private equity. So you didn't totally dismiss it, but what did you find when you went out talking to traditional search fund investors? Say more about what you hinted at earlier.
Yeah, and what I'll say is, I feel so fortunate having found the search community in general. I'm very regular attendee of the Chicago, the Chicago booth, Northwestern event. I think it's fantastic. I've made friends. There's people that, I've met up with that I try to mentor and kind of bring them along. Anybody will give time to you, when you call them. I mean, it's very welcoming that way. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to give you the money. And what I got very consistently was for the handful of people I talked to, and they're the names that everybody talks to. And so it kind of doesn't matter in that regard. But the feedback I got is what I would summarize as, I really like you. I believe that you will be successful. So when you get the deal, let me know. I might want it. But the profile to bank somebody as a surety of the return of investment as best they can, I wasn't really willing to relocate. I had a very specific objective of what I thought I wanted to do. I said I wanted to do more of a manufacturing firm. I'm a little older, which is a double-edged sword in terms of...
How old were you at this point?
How old am I now? I was like 42.
Okay.
Something like that. 41, 42. And so have more experience, but in some ways that also means that I have stronger opinions and life experiences and stuff. My experience on the traditional search fund, they love the idea of somebody coming out of their MBA. They are so hungry. They have virtually no restrictions. And they're saying, I'm going to find the company and I'm going to do everything it takes. And I don't care if it's in some town you've never heard of in Oklahoma. If it's the right company, I'm going. So as an investor, it's like, hey, this is a pretty good bet. For me, I think, and it's funny because now I'm kind of a little bit in the other chair. I've talked to these people and it's like, hey, you could totally be successful. Or 2 or 3 months from now, you can get a call from one of your buddies offering you a CEO gig and you'll take it. So I understand why they passed. No hard feelings. Actually, my mom did. So thanks, Mom.
Well, I was going to ask you, you mentioned investors.
Yeah.
So you did raise money from Mom and who else?
Well, so I raised money from Mom in the search fund and then in the search fund. And luckily I had just enough to make it until I was actually able to get the company, which is a whole other timing thing that I can't take credit for. The other investor that came in is now currently my CFO. And he came in when we had a target, when we actually had an equity offering. And at that point I was actually way more selective. Like I really had a much better understanding of how big it was, how much money I needed to do, how much did I have to raise. So I wasn't just talking to anybody at that point. And ultimately we ended up being my mom rolling over from the search fund. Brandon, named Brandon Barons, he's my CFO, and how we met and the whole thing's a whole other story because we didn't know each other when I started this process at all. And my own savings, and literally I was one of those people that drew out of the retirement to make sure that I could finish the capital stack on this SBA 7A loan that we took.
So really it was kind of friends and family. It was friends and family.
No, there are no what I would consider professional investors in this. And again, that was one of the things that was sort of non-negotiable for me. I mean, the company, we haven't talked about the parent company, but GBR Riverdale, named after my kids, Gretchen, Rachel, Bridget. GBR Riverdale. Riverdale is actually the school district that they were in elementary school. I like to joke, it's my family office without any money. But maybe that'll change. It'd be nice if it changes. But this for me was always a legacy play. It was about doing something that I can love, that's building something for my family and for the future. I didn't want to have the pressure. If I thought it was suboptimal to sell, I didn't want to have a bunch of LPs that were going to force me into it. It's as simple as that.
And this optionality, or excuse me, this legacy, this building something for your family, is that because you envision them, one of the GBR or one or more of them in the business, or not necessarily? It's just this really valuable business that the family owns and its optionality, and who knows what that looks like or what benefit that delivers in the future. But it's clearly beneficial, and it's something that you want to just have indefinitely and see what comes of that holding.
Yeah, that's probably the reality of it. So right now they're all pretty young. Obviously we've owned the company or Timberline now for over 4 years. But the kids are 9, 11, and 13, all girls. The last time that they visited Timberline anyway, the how do I put this delicately? The oldest did not envision herself going there for work. let's put it that way. It just, and so maybe they don't. And actually what I really hope is we have another company. We have another companies we acquired. We're talking more Timberline, but we've done it. One didn't work and it wound down. There's another one, a recycled auto business that we're currently working on. That's kind of our project too on the GBR side. That's almost a separate conversation. But the vision always was kind of a family of companies that, I wasn't looking to take over the world. I wasn't looking at being filthy rich or anything. Provide a nice, comfortable opportunity and life, for the family in something that I could truly love. And if they love it and come in, great. If in the future it just ends up getting sold, great. It's all about the best for your kids. But everybody has a romantic notion of, and my kids will take it over. I hold it. I don't know if I'm banking on it.
Well, happily, your 13-year-old, how she feels today is unlikely to be the same way she feels at 33. True. Now, at 33, she may still not want to be in the pallet manufacturing business. Right. So let's not hold our breath. But lots can change between now and then.
Yep.
Before we get too far away from your experience with the traditional search fund investors, this is very top of mind for me because I've been preparing for a webinar that I'm doing right after our interview now with search investors. And there is this, the message you got from them that, hey, you don't fit the profile, so I'm not going to fund your search, but you look and feel and smell like somebody who can do this. You just aren't close enough to my buy box. I think is such a powerful point because it can be discouraging to people when they are rejected by investors. No thanks, says the investor. Sure. But you just always have to remember that just because an investor says, investors have different criteria than you have and what you're doing with your life and project. So just because they say no to you, it's not necessarily because what you're attempting is not viable or won't be successful. And I intend to make that point today on the webinar, and it's already come up with you and me here, sort of. Yep. Although it doesn't really sound like you were discouraged. It sounded like you just took it as feedback and carried on your merry way anyway. But
well, it's probably a polite way to put it. I wasn't going to quit. I wouldn't say that I didn't get off, and I'm like, another one. But, I'd heard a lot, too, that even for people that have been successful in raising, traditional search funds, that the hardest is the first one. So they go and they're like shopping and they get this feedback. And then it gets to the point where they're still talking and they're like, well, who else is in? And then all of a sudden they'll fall like dominoes because they're comfortable with those 7 people and they go, boom, 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 I'll take all your shares and you're fully funded. So it just, as I went on further and I got the feedback and I thought about it, I'm like, and I will tell you, control was huge for me because at that point I felt I'd had some really good jobs where like in, general manager type jobs where I had a lot of influence and kind of managerial power within these things, but I didn't have control because it wasn't corporate. And maybe it was private equity. Maybe it was just a large corporation. And I just said, you know what? I'm not a good employee anymore. And all I'm doing is changing the nature of being an employee if I don't have the control. So it made sense to me, and I'm glad it worked out because now looking back, I realize how it almost didn't. Timeline and money and resources and COVID and all these other things that happened right when we were buying. You look back on it and you say, nailed it.
I landed that thing. Well,
yeah, because it did.
And we're about to hear that. We're about to hear it, Michael. But before we get there, I just want to, you're reminding me of this great framework. Do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? Do you want to be rich? Do you want to be king?
Sure.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
And so the kind of what that captures is the king prioritizes control, being master of his own destiny, his own fief or empire, but maybe less wealth ultimately. Do you want to be rich is you're just prioritizing for your balance sheet. So just taking you and Luis, and obviously we're not putting words in his mouth, but somebody like Luis maybe who in 5 or 7 years, if he's successful going the more kind of private equity independent sponsor route, is likely to emerge younger with more wealth than you. So maybe that would kind of fit into the wanted to be rich path. Whereas Michael Kelker wants to be king, not trying to get filthy rich, not trying to get rich as soon as possible. But being kind of master of his destiny is really what matters. For his priorities.
Luis actually, so he operated that company for nearly 7 years, I think. And he's transitioned now. I think they're getting towards it, like the private equity company's getting towards the end. I'm sure they're looking to sell, just whatever. He did it for a while, and then it was kind of time for him to move on. And now he's exploring options. And I wouldn't be surprised if with the relationships he's built that he tries to build his own private equity company. And he can do it. Tremendously skilled, but I'm happy with my path for sure.
Great. Okay. Anything more to say about your search before we get into your discovery of Timberline?
The one thing that I will say, whether I guess I'll say it now rather than segue in, is that I got tremendously lucky because I found Timberline within the first 6 months of my search. And that doesn't happen very often. And it's 20 miles from home. Tremendously lucky. Again, another thing I look back on and I'm like, boy, did that work out? Because that was not my search criteria. My search criteria literally was about a 200-mile circle. And my plan was, if I have to be gone during the week, I can still get home on the weekends. If it's a practical matter, you can't commute it. And I always prefer to do that, but I'm really glad that's not how it worked out.
Yeah. I mean, 200 miles, that's what, 3.5, 4 hours potentially, in which case, yeah, you would have been spending your weeks there.
Yep. It all seems like a good idea at the time.
Well, Timberline, you discover it. How did you find it?
So I'd been networking around. You go to sessions, you just try to get the word out like any job search, whatever it is. And somehow, and I forget exactly where I met him, but there was a vice president of commercial lending at a local credit union that I talked with at some point. And he contacts me and he says, "You're still looking for a company?" And I said, "Yes." He's like, "Well, we've got one that I know about that we decided not to bank because we didn't like the buyer. But I've seen the financials. It's like, this is a solid company. It's been around for 40 years. You should take a look because their deal just fell through." They were going to have an out-of-town buyer and something happened. I think it was like personally related or whatever. And he backed out. So my initial impression is, the heck would I want to do with a pallet company? I was looking for machine shops. I was looking for, high value added kind of stuff. That's what I was comfortable with. And I said, What the heck am I going to want to do with a pallet shop? But hey, I'm looking for a business. He said it's a good one. So we go and you look into it and it's like, well, okay, blue chip company. It's like got real customers. It's been a John Deere supplier, like literally from the beginning, 40 plus years. All these other, like real companies. I'm like, okay. And I'm looking around and saying, okay, so it's just 2x4s and 2x6s and nail guns and saws. I'm like, okay, I think I can figure that out. So for some reason I said, yeah, you know what? I think I can do this. And the financials made sense. Profitable company had been for years. So it was doing about 2.5 million in revenue. And on 2.5 million, they were putting about 500,000 in SDE down, depending on the year and how you look. So it was bankable. And it's obviously that banker. And the thing is, it was kind of nice about it is I already had an in on where to bank it. I didn't then have to go and sell a whole bunch of banks. I literally went to him and said, okay, you're going to give me a good rate. And he said, yeah, I'll give you a good rate. So that part was super easy as well. And the sellers were, unlike some people that in the search process, these sellers were motivated because as far as they're concerned, they got left at the altar. Yeah. So they already had all their plans and they were going to be done in a month and, all this kind of thing. And so when I came in, I might have saved a little bit of money, maybe not. There was a whole thing with valuation and COVID because this was right at the end of, literally it was January of 2020 was when we were doing this whole thing. So like right before everything shut down. But a lot of it was just sort of smooth. It was just the right opportunity at the right time. And I said, okay, yeah, I can do this. This makes sense to me.
And Michael, how do you feel about that SDE of 500? Is that larger, smaller than you were targeting? It's a little bit smaller than the ideal, but
yeah, it was fine. It was on kind of the bottom band. I always said like 500,000 was probably the lowest, that I was looking at. Everybody would always kind of like more, but when I looked at it and I looked at what the debt load was going to be, relative to sort of the standard of living I was hoping for in margin, I'm like, okay, I can get comfortable with it for sure.
And the 500,000 of SDE on 2.5 million of revenue, so let's call that 20% net margins. That seems pretty good for manufacturing, as I understand it, particularly when manufacturing something that you yourself just pointed out is pretty undifferentiated, pretty simple and low moat, kind of low moat manufacturing.
Yeah,
I'm surprised that they were so profitable, that their margins were that strong.
Part of the reason is that the business very deliberately avoided the commoditized areas. So when you conventionally think of a pallet, when you think of the things that there's billions of them out in the world right now. And you think of 48 by 40, You go to the supermarket, you see a pallet, you're at Costco, you see a pallet. Those are highly commoditized. The margins are really, really slim because everybody can do them. And you've got some real Goliaths in the industry that are just pumping out tens of thousands of them a day. This business was more of an export focus for manufacturers, and there really was focused on the custom solutions for manufacturers. So I don't make 48 by 40s virtually at all. I make a few. I do a little bit of recycle. It's all kind of a hobby. But twice a week for a supplier for John Deere that actually goes with a harvester when it's shipping out of the harvester plant for John Deere, there's a crate. It's approximately 9 foot wide and 3 foot high, and 45 of them fit into a 53-foot container. You can only fit 45 of them, and that's a load. So this is it's very custom. It is sort of labor intensive, but the fact that it's a individualized solution for them, not something that is just, being able to bought kind of in the open market very easily, is why some of the margins are better. And we try to be really efficient, and that is pretty critical.
And this point about providing custom solutions, custom build, crate, pallet handling materials to your customers, like the marquee customers like John Deere. Does that mean, I assume, that there's heavily recurring or reoccurring business, that these relationships are pretty long-standing once you kind of develop something custom?
Yeah, they're very sticky, and that was another thing that was really attractive to it. We're not working with brokers. People aren't calling and saying, "Hey, I need a truckload of this," and we'll never see them again, because that's not the product we're doing. Our customers, frankly, we've had in many cases for decades, and it's because we try very hard to have a very high customer service. If anything goes wrong, we fix it. We'll do anything to make it right. And frankly, we keep our promises, and we stay out of the way, and we have reasonable pricing. So when you add all that together, there's this little slogan that we've never really developed, but it's kind of in my head. It's something like, I try to make the last thing you think about the last thing you think about, or something like that. It's not a fully formed slogan yet, but the concept is there. Regardless of what business we support, they don't care about the box unless the box isn't there or it's wrong. If you're there on time supporting them, if you jump when they get in trouble because they didn't realize they're out, that just builds tremendous customer loyalty. And we do everything we can to reward that. And because we're not doing the things that are easy to farm out to other people, I mean, there's the biggest thing we do is 300 inches long. A lot of companies don't want to touch that.
300 inches long. Yeah. What is that? 25 feet? Something like that?
Yeah, give or take. I have to get out the calculator, but yeah, I mean, they're long enough. There are a lot of pallet companies out there that love to buy a machine and build something that's no more than 50 to 55 inches. So, and we, quite a bunch of the work that we support is actually more for augers. When you think about like combines in the ag industry, they've got those long augers in front that are, chewing up the corn or, whatever they're doing. Those things can be, 17, 18 feet long, and they need to be created. And that's the kind of thing that we've specialized in. And because other people don't want to do it, it allows us to have a little bit more margin on some of that. Other things are more heavily competed and we don't. And we try very hard to buy wood, which is our number one cost driver for sure. Labor is number two. So we try to buy smartly and also make sure that we work as efficiently as possible.
Well, Michael, it sounds like you're a niche within the larger pallet industry, which that's probably how the industry works. Like you said, the commoditized stuff with which we're all familiar is probably just commoditized, been commoditized away, and it's just some giants cranking those out. Still, can you, as you considered this acquisition, you must have looked at the pallet industry. Now you're inside it. You're an expert. Is there something more to teach about the pallet business, the pallet the pallet industry. It's not one that we think about unless you're in supply chain. Although interestingly, somebody has introduced me to another entrepreneur who bought a pallet business, pallet manufacturer. So, so there you go. It's probably a bigger industry than we think. Give us the 101 on the pallet business.
Yeah, so I had to go and research my facts, but basically in the U.S., it's a $15 billion industry. There are literally thousands of pallet producers, everything from, especially when you start talking about recycling and stuff like that. It moves everything. Literally everything you see on a truck, virtually everything you see in a store that got to a shelf, it probably got there through using a pallet. Globally, and I forget the number again, I'd have to look it up, but I think it's on the order of, something like almost a $200 billion industry globally, because it facilitates commerce. It truly does. So it's the kind of thing that nobody thinks about it until you say, how am I going to get that thing over there? I have a fork truck, but I can't just do it. It needs to get crated. It needs to get palletized. There are some tremendously large, in some instances, private equity backed conglomerates that they have nearly full automation on these things because the pricing is so commoditized. But it's also a highly fragmented industry, especially when you get more like us in the way that you get a smaller operation. We're 25 people, 25 hardworking people. We're 25 people, and we've got our 30 companies that we support within a certain distance because you don't really ship the box. And
what do you mean by that?
You will find corrugated box companies, pallet companies, anything that's bulky that actually would end up doing a lot of air the shipping cost starts outweighing the regional production cost. So it's not like there's only one place that they're producing all this stuff. If you're making something and it goes in a box, you will find pallet companies around there. And you will also find like corrugated boxes and some of these other sort of enablements to the manufacturing, because it is, even with the labor rate in China, the idea of producing all that stuff there and then shipping it all the way to the US to then, get paired with whatever this widget is that somebody's making, it's just completely uneconomical. So it's not that you don't ship it, but historically, pallet companies, the reason that there are so many of them and also why it's such a highly fragmented market, which is another kind of classic search fund type profile, is because that pallet company is probably supporting whatever their customer base is within 100 miles. Because once you're further than an hour or two by truck, the economics usually stop working.
Well, I had to test this idea, Michael, ahead of our call. So I put in pallet manufacturers into Google Maps, and sure enough, there's a couple around the DC area. Yeah, right. Exactly. 2 or 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So
they looked very mom and pop. They looked kind of, 10, 20, 30-year-old businesses with pictures of pallets on the website.
So one of the things we're working on right now, it's actually, we started to move to EOS, which is a topic, depending on time, I'd love to talk about later. One of my rocks for EOS, because it has transformed our business and we're continuing to learn. But my rock for this quarter is revamping the marketing materials and updating the website. You would be amazed, though, in the kind of industry it is. Yes, 20 to 30 years old. They don't even have websites. Our customers know how to reach us. I've been supporting them for 20 years. It's like, well, what, are you getting any more? It's like, why would I? 20 years ago, I wanted more, but hey, I'm good. There's very much a lot of that, which is fantastic for the customers I want to retain, challenging for the ones I'd like to get.
Because it's one of these where customers are really sticky. It's a mature industry. So getting new customers means stealing them from one of your competitors.
Yeah, for the most part, especially a couple of years ago, the ramp up and the whole, COVID economy and all the stuff that kind of happened and the craziness in transportation, there was tremendous growth because the demand on the industry was extreme, and we rode that, and it was quite an exciting time. But now that things are a little bit more normal, and I do think the economy's, kind of trending downward, it becomes a zero-sum game for sure.
Well, it also, though, makes for an industry where acquiring your regional competitors seems like a logical way to grow, inorganic growth. Is that something that was part of your thesis, or has taken shape since you've been owner of Timberline?
It wasn't part of the thesis, as in, I didn't say, this is going to be a roll up. But we're definitely looking at that, because you're right. It is the easiest way, just to grow. So we're not actively seeking right now, but there is a profile that on stuff we don't do, that if we found something that wasn't too far away, but differentiated customers, and, we don't do any hardwoods. And you can get all the technical aspect of it, but basically there's fundamentally two types of producers: the ones that use softwoods, pine, spruce, and that's us, and the ones that use hardwoods or hardwood or mixed. We don't do hardwoods. So if there was another producer of the right size that was only 50 miles away that was more focused on hardwood stuff, I'd absolutely be interested in that.
But sorry, why wouldn't you be interested in your softwood competitor down the block as a way of growing? Because to grow your revenue otherwise means trying to steal their customers. Why not just buy them and therefore their customers?
Yeah, no, it's worth looking at. But then you sort of get in the whole thing of rather than possibly trying to, if the economics work, absolutely. Always kind of look at it and just sort of say, yeah, is that a good way to grow? Then do you consolidate? Do you sort of like shut them down? Do you have two plants in a very short period of time, in a very short area? But yeah, no, we're absolutely looking at it. For me, I'm always right now, I'm kind of on this as the industry is slowing down. There's a roller coaster ride. There's tremendous growth, and the bubble has popped, and now I won't say depression, but we're definitely a little under. So where my head is right now is additional opportunities, new opportunities, potentially new markets. So I default there, but no, perfectly good, good point.
And in terms of this depression that the industry is going through, or this pretty severe lull, when you described, I assume that the industry is very tightly correlated with trucking. When you made that point about anything that ends up on a shelf was sitting on a pallet at some point, you'll hear the same thing about trucking. Anything that's on a shelf got there at some point, a truck touched it, or it was sitting on a truck. So pretty tight correlation there. And of course, there's been carnage in the trucking industry this year. So similar.
And I kind of argue, you go up a step, it's sort of manufacturing, because they're making it, it's getting sold, it's got to go somewhere, and all that is tied together. And as a company, Timberline is where we are in the Quad Cities, it's the world headquarters of John Deere. Ag is a big driver here. Ag has been having their challenges as well. Commodity prices for farmers is very low. So it's a challenge, but the company's been around for 45 years. I don't think I'm messing it up that bad, so we'll weather it. Just new opportunities, and I don't want to. We always need a fair price, but I do think it's a lose-lose if the only way you win is cheaper, because it becomes a race to the bottom. So we're being judicious.
Yeah. Great, Michael. Let's return to the story here and hear about the adventures in actually closing on this business. So COVID plays a role. It's January of 2020. You like it. You want to go after it. Then what happens?
So we go get, I get the financials. About a month or two prior to that, I met this gentleman named Brandon, who now is the CFO, and my partners. And we met again. He was working as a banker. And we met him. I met him at a coffee networking, session. And he said, "Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun." He's like, "I've been doing community banking for 20 years. I've loaned to tons of people like you. Let's do coffee." So we kind of did coffee. So, in I found Timberline. And then what I found was, as I got more data, and I was an MBA, so I'm able to kind of pour through the financials and everything else. But I kept going to this guy and saying, hey, what do you think? Because it turns out that he was literally a block away from where I was doing a co-working, renting an office, in the search. He was a block away. So I kept starting to just like knock on his door and be like, hey, you got a minute? And he's like, sure. And I go on and be like, is this forecast too optimistic? You know what I mean? I'm just trying to bounce all this stuff off him. And then we kind of went through that, and it was kind of building a relationship with this guy and negotiating with the owners. And then it got to the point where we settled on a price. We're actually doing the due diligence, moving through. This is now, say January. I think I initially started talking to them maybe November, December, but it's all very compressed timeline. And started to talk with them. I'm getting to know this banker guy, and I'm putting together, basically the investment thesis, and going through all this stuff. And we've finalized on the final price. We're basically through, almost through due diligence. Now it's February, March, and everything gets shut down in 2020 for COVID. And I'm like, what do? I mean, I'm still in the due diligence. I've got some earnest money out there, but I'm still in due diligence. I could have backed away, but I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, revenues, they support what Illinois consider, it's an Illinois-based business, what they consider essential businesses, manufacturing. I'm like, so they didn't really miss a beat. And the way that they operate, everybody is, at least 4 to 5 feet away from each other. I'm like, okay, so we're legal. And so we kind of went through a little bit of a gut check. And so went and I said, okay, I'm going to keep monitoring it, but we're not just going to stop. We figured out, the final price. We got through the due diligence. By this point, Brandon had went from the casual, like, hey, yeah, I'll give you my opinion, whatever, to kind of say, hey, when you get this together, I think I'd like to see it. So like somehow I'd convinced this guy that I was worth banking on, and he knew that his bank wasn't going to fund it. We weren't a good profile for his job. He was talking personally. So we're going all the way down the process. We go for the appraisal, and they had just had an appraisal like 8 months before the other deal. And so they go and they say they got to refresh their appraisal. I think for SBA, it needs to be within 6 months or something like that. We just passed the threshold of what the banking institution that we chose, who was actually the one that original gentleman that gave me the lead. So he was going to underwrite it as an SBA lender. So all this stuff's lining up. And then we go for the appraisal, and the appraisal comes back. It was originally higher than what had been negotiated before on the original sale that fell through. Our price was a little bit less. The appraisal came back even less. And I was shocked. I was like, nothing's changed. Like literally nothing has changed. I mean, maybe sales are off 2% or something. And so I go and I'm just trying to ask him, I'm like, hey, what's going on? And the answer that I got was basically like, COVID, we don't know what's going to happen. I'm like, but the revenues are still the same. They're holding firm. The margins are, if anything, they're getting a little bit better because everything's shutting down. So people aren't building houses and stuff. So like lumber's getting cheaper. Like what's going on? And they basically said, well, it's all unknown and we need to hedge risk, and that's in valuation of business. And that's it. So yeah, I ended up having I forget exactly what it was, but I think it was around $100,000 shortfall to valuation now.
Because the seller was still going to want their number just because the bank has valued it less.
Yeah, we talked about it, and they basically gave me, and I don't know if it was a negotiation tactic or not, but they kind of came back with, hey, we really like you, but we've already agreed to accept a little less. And now we've got 2 people that apparently are willing to buy about this amount. we're not different. If we got to wait another year, we got to wait another year. We're not moving. So they just
I
weren't
have to say that
price.
was bold of them. You'd think that a seller in the midst of, peak COVID would be like, wow, any buyer still sticking around now? Let's get out. I mean, it was just such
like
an
I said,
uncertain
maybe
time.
it was just good negotiation and I was a sucker. I don't know. But I believed them. But what they did do is they basically, they did it as a seller's note. So they were willing to do that. So I didn't need to go back and either directly raise more money or mess with the amount of equity that was going towards the 7A.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked it out, and it was one of those things where in the 7A, I packaged it up as a total number, but in the total number, a certain amount of that was actually coming back to cover working capital. So we actually tweaked it that the valuation of the business was lowered by that amount. I think it was around 100,000, maybe it was 150, I forget, but it was lowered by that amount. But then we adjusted for the purposes of the deal, the working capital number, and then the owners helped finance that aspect of the working capital. So everybody was willing partners. All the fundamentals as far as the business itself was still there. But it was a very uncertain time. I mean, for sure. And if you think I didn't wake up occasionally saying, am I being foolish? Because what if in 6 months the sky does fall? I'd be lying.
Yeah. Well, it was a very uncertain time. So I applaud your courage there. Although, of course, we know that buying when there's blood in the streets is a great moment to make moves. But on the other hand, the fact that the business is happily carrying on through COVID, it's being stress tested before your eyes and scoring very well in this once in a generation moment. So in some ways, you could argue that the value. I mean, if you put aside the giant question of what will happen to the macroeconomy with COVID, if you put that big question aside, you could argue that the business valuation should be higher because it's basically been tested, and so now it seems like a less risky bet.
Right. I'll take that for when somebody walks around and wants to give me, $10 million for it. I'll entertain that offer.
So what was your final, what did the final purchase price and structure of the deal look like?
So it was 2.2 million was the total purchase price. But of that, approximately 400,000 was considered working capital type adjustments. So the business itself was about 1.8 million is what it was valued at.
Okay. All right, great.
And it was nice that the banker with the 7A, they didn't push back on us financing that stuff. Like I said, it's a solid company. It's been around for a while. The companies they support weren't going anywhere.
And so how much equity did you have to bring? What percent down?
It was a 90-10. They let us kind of do the minimum. And again, I think it was a combination of confidence in me, in my experience and my ability to do it, and the fact that they just felt so comfortable with the robustness of the customer base and reasonable margins.
So it was your equity check then was 220-ish, give or take, and some of that came from your now partner, some of that came from your mom, and and the rest of it came from you personally.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah, I should have refreshed my memory, but all those numbers, if they're not quite right, they're very close.
Yeah. No, appreciate it. Thank you for the transparency, Michael. Okay. Let's hear about so as it turns out, as enthusiastic as we are talking about how the business is being stress tested through COVID. In fact, there were many chapters of COVID, as we all remember. And this was before lumber prices went crazy, which is your number one cost in the business is lumber.
Yep.
So turns out to have been a terrible time, you've survived, but you were about to endure a very scary and almost historic kind of business moment. I mean, what lumber did was not something that happens but once a decade. So tell us that story, Michael.
So there I was in the fall of 2020, still trying to figure out the business. You're still learning the owners by that point. I'm pretty sure I had a 6 month, we had a 6 month period where basically they were going to continue to assist. But they were slowly moving out, but there was always no animosity or no challenges like, hey, if you need something, just call me. But it was funny. One of the younger of the two partners, about 3 weeks in, he kind of looks around one day and he says, "You got this. Call me if you need me." You know what I mean? And I did occasionally. But anyway, he calls me in like December, and he says, "Hey, I watched and I forget exactly what it is, but it's like an agricultural news segment." He says, I watch it all the time. He's like, "Get ready. They are forecasting that it's in the next month or two, it's gonna go nuts." And he's like, "Get ready." And I'm like, "Okay, great. I'm ready." Right? I wasn't ready. It's like, so.
Well, was he more specific, or was he just like, some kind of storm is coming, don't know what the nature of it will be, but
so
hunker down?
We do have a concentration. I would say it's sort of a concentration issue right now, for sure, with some of the news coming out of John Deere. They're downsizing quite a bit, doing adjustments, a lot of news coming out. Both our metro area and also our business specifically is heavily influenced by John Deere. And John Deere was basically, all their forecasts were going through the roof. A combination of the Trump Jobs Act, as far as some of the stimulations and bonus depreciation, other things that had kind of been in the works already. COVID, people staying home, and so the food market kind of changing, and all this other stuff just meant that John Deere's forecasts were like going through the roof. So the work we do direct for John Deere, as well as a lot of the sub-tier suppliers that we support, all their forecasts were going through the roof. And that's when he was saying, just sort of get ready. It's not like he was predicting a particular thing. He's just like, hey, they're going to want to ship a lot, get ready. Right.
Yeah.
And so that happened. So all the forecasts started going up. And this is in spring of 2021. And then right about that time, you started hearing a combination of the shutdowns, and everybody decided with their extra money that they're going to remodel the kitchen, and they're going to put on the addition, and they're getting their dream space. And so anyway, the building went through the roof. So then, within 6 to 9 months, the commodity price for wood, which basically, depending on how you look at it, is between 50 and 70% of the cost of my product, on any given thing. It's a pallet. If it's a pallet, it's more commoditized, easy to make pallet. That content is higher relative to price. If it's more the specialty stuff and a lot of labor in it, obviously it changes, right? But huge number one driver without a doubt. And it's going up, and it's going up, and it's getting scarce, and then you can't get it, and it's going up. So we got to the point that by the fall of that year, and this is where Brandon, the banker who did invest, who shortly after, about 6 months after investing, for a personal reason, he ended up relocating, and he called me up and he's like, "Hey, I don't want to get another job at another bank. Would you need help?" And I said, "Yes, I'd die for a CFO." So he came on kind of full time, working remotely in this period of time, but he was a banker. And it was such a massive help, because we're going back to the bank and saying, we can't our working capital, we can't afford this. We've been able to work through with our customers and said, guys, we're not doing this for fun. Look at the commodity pricing. Look at this bundle of wood that, used to cost, we'll say $1,000, just to make the math easy, is now $4,000.
Wow.
We were changing prices like, quarterly, if not monthly, just riding it up, because there's no margin to take those kind of swings. And wood was getting so scarce that literally you were buying anything you could get your hands on. And we got to the point where I was overcommitted. Call it panic buying, call it whatever. I had this order book that was full, and it literally is, how fast can you make it? Because the demand was so strong. I was able to justify my pricing, and because a combination of the demand and the fact that we're able to do a reasonable justification to be like, hey, I'm not gouging. I'm not taking advantage and gouging. I'm telling you the wood is this much and we need to make margin. So we got to the point that we're going back to the bank and saying, we need more on our line. We need more on our line. And then we got to this one instance where literally we had about $1.5 million, $1.5 million in lumber that was committed to, that was on its way or already in the yard, for a company that the real valuation of the company was $1.8 million. So we basically have as much WIP and inventory as the value of the company in this time period. And we went to the bank and I said, look, I might have messed up, but I'm doing it because I've got product and the order book is full. This isn't all speculative. I just got to do the work, but I really need another $500,000. and they worked with us, and I'm so glad they did. I'm so glad to appreciate Brandon in this time period, because he likes to say, he's like, he talked to these guys and say, okay, let's talk banker to banker, right? He kind of, inside jargon. But he went and he walked them through it. Here's the order book. And so we ended up, the SBA, we had an SBA line of credit, SBA backed, that initially we had at 150,000. At its height, it went up to $1 million. And then they gave us a bridge loan for 120 days to cover that other $500,000 that we couldn't float. But we went and we told them, we said, okay, the wood's coming in. We're going to be cutting into product within 30 days. It's going to get shipped out within another 30 days. The accounts receivable is going to be coming back, and then we're going to be paying off the line. We're done ordering for a while, and we just worked through it. It was a very tense time, but we had a plan and it worked. And in the end, we ended up completely repaying that note in the timeline. And actually, I like to think that it gave us a tremendous amount of credibility with our banking partner, because we laid out a plan. We showed them how it was reasonable. Not only was it reasonable, it was truly achievable, because then we did. And it was about a year after that, we'd fully extinguished that line, all the way down, including the working capital line. So yeah, we'd brought back $1.5 million, extinguishing all that. By that point, the lumber pricing, both in terms of pricing, it wasn't 3 and 4X anymore, so it had normalized somewhat. But also, we'd just gotten better with our inventory and our discipline and ordering and understanding lead times and everything else. So it was quite a time. I'm glad we lived through it, largely unscathed. But it was a great learning experience as well.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on kind of making a really big strategic move early in your tenure in an uncertain time, and having it work out. I mean, the workout part sounds like it was skillful. Yeah.
The one thing that at this point, and this is one of the lessons I'd say kind of for honestly any entrepreneur, but also somebody who's new into the business. You're going to get your value. You've got your investment thesis and everything else, but you're going to get your value out of the business and grow the value of the business by being a combination of understanding what's always worked for that business and trying to innovate and do new things. So some of the growth we did really was because I said yes to stuff that we typically didn't do. Now, a few of those, I found out exactly why we don't do it, and we don't do it anymore. But in the balance, we're better for it. We did additional wood sizing and stuff we don't do. We went after stuff with a level of sophistication that historically they didn't do. And during that time, was I biting off more than I can chew? Well, on a particular day, possibly guilty. But as far as making the business better and being committed and all in and driven to make it my own and also, grow, it was a tremendous time. And, nights and weekends, and we were throwing out equipment that had been, like forklifts that had died, that they stuck in a corner for 15 years because we needed the space. It was a tremendous time. It's one of those somewhere between I'd never do it again, and it was the best time of my life. I don't know which. I guess ask me on the day. But it was. I mean, honestly, I'm glad it all worked out in the end.
And Michael, just the kind of related to that, I just want to understand how learning the industry went. I mean, you were trial by fire. You were having to kind of play on hard mode, an industry that you were just learning. But for somebody who was coming from completely outside the industry, always interesting to hear from a searcher and what that learning curve looked like. Especially for anybody out there who might be considering buying a pallet business or other manufacturing business, but not really know anything about that industry. What did it look like to learn it?
It was definitely assembly without a manual. But you try to research as best you can through whatever your resources happen to be. But really what you're doing is you're learning from both your customers and also your employees. The gentleman who now is we have two main production focused leaders in the business now. Kind of a change we did when we went to EOS. But the one gentleman, he built hand-built pallets for about 10 years. So there is nothing you want to know about how they would build and why. Quality of wood. Hey, that looks bad, but it's fine. That doesn't look that bad, but let me tell you why it's problematic. I mean, I learned, his name's Leo Morales. I learned a tremendous amount of him on how you construct a pallet. This is easy to build. That's hard to build. It doesn't really look like a difference, but it may take another 10 seconds. So things like that, and you're getting that from the employees that you can trust and learning, and frankly, being humble enough to be like, I own the company, but I know nothing. You've been here for 12 years. You know everything. Help me. You know what I mean? Like do that. And also having a similar sort of humbleness in talking to the customers. Yeah, and the farmer owners. It's like, hey, why does this company insist on that? And be like, well, 10 years ago this happened. Okay, thank you for telling me that. Because I think it's stupid. And I might have said something. So it's stuff like that. But otherwise, it's definitely one of those things that at some point you just got to do it and be committed. But I think it's worth doing. But and this is kind of in life. I'm a confident person. I mean, even just the risk of doing this, and with SBA, I mean, basically, virtually everything I have can be clawed back if it fails, and it takes a certain amount of chutzpah to do that, right? But don't be arrogant, and recognize, especially if you're going into a new industry, you have a lot to learn. And even if you're in an industry that you think you don't know the customers of that company, and you don't know the people, and you don't know what truly makes it great. And the only way you're going to learn is with open ears, asking the right questions, and being humble.
Great point, Michael. Well, we're not going to have time to do your EOS, but I want to close with just some kind of reflections back. So it's been 4 years. So you closed, did you say it was June? It was June 2020?
June 2020, June 5th.
Yeah. So we're on July 18th as we record. So you're just over 4 years in the business.
Yep.
So first of all, quantify it for us. Where is revenue for the business today?
So right now, revenue is about double what it was when we bought the business. The funny thing is, because of the commodity prices, it had gone up 3 times, but a lot of that was passed through. And it basically was passed through on the material side. But it is double what it was, because that whole 2021, 2022, that massive demand, I mean, we grew along with it, and the pricing was all elevated because the lumber was elevated. So it's, in some ways, now is a much better apples to apples comparison Because in 2022, we had an $8 million revenue year. And you're like, whoa, you went from 2.5 to 8? It's like, yes, but about 4 million of that was, well, let's say 3 million of that was elevated material cost.
Yeah.
So you can't look at it and be like, we did it. We're like, hey, we had an awesome year. But if you really look at it, it's not that way. But when you look at June 2020 to the run rate for this year, yeah, we went from 2.5 and we're on a run rate for 5.
And to your point about revenue awesome. being directional, but not being the whole story.
Yeah.
What does EBITDA look like?
EBITDA is definitely better in some ways, but also we did a tremendous amount of investment. We did so from the EBITDA perspective, yes, it's better. I'm not going to fully elaborate in some ways, but we're largely able to hold margins on a lot of it. So as we've grown and gotten more efficient, we have done a lot of additional investment. We put over $1 million back into the company, both in terms of building improvements, fixes, upgrades, and new machinery. So from an EBITDA perspective, I would say it's percentage-wise is roughly the same. But in the practical matter, a lot of that is going back to pay the bank for a lot of the equipment and stuff. So the future is bright, but it's not like the cash flow has gone through the roof.
Yeah. Last question for you, Michael, about the future being bright. Sure. 4 years into this adventure, given the growth that you just described, the ups and downs, the lumber adventure, et cetera, how do you feel now about the overall project, the overall plan, and your kind of vision of a legacy business, a family business? Situate it for us now and how you think about it.
This was the right choice for me. I can say without reservation that even when I'm really stressed or really worried, I'm still happier than I was for that last, 5 years kind of working for somebody else. The business itself, we've got a great team. I know you said we don't have time to kind of go in the whole EOS thing, but we did start EOS about a year ago. Our implementer is Andrea Jones. I promised that I'd do a shout out. And we did it very intentionally bilingual English and Spanish because 2 of the leadership team are actually native Mexico Spanish speakers, strong English. But that whole process and setting up the leadership team and setting up clarity of goals and values and everything else has just put us in a great position where I just have tremendous confidence in the team, because it's not about the saw, it's about the people running the saws. And with that, I'm really, really kind of optimistic for the future. We're in a challenging point. We talked about the pallet thing. There's definitely a strong softening. I won't say depression, that's really dramatic, but the ag industry is having some challenges. Our main customers laying off. We've got challenges. But I believe in the team and I believe in our value proposition. And so, yeah, I'm absolutely optimistic for the future. And I wouldn't have changed the decision. I'm glad I didn't get cold feet, 4 years ago due to COVID. Let's put it that way.
And Michael, just the point about the team, I'm hearing you talk about the team. We're not going to have time to get into it, but we did a little bit on the pre-call. And your you kind of smile as you talk about the team.
Yeah.
I'm gonna project onto you, and you tell me if it lands. One of the things that so many of my guests experience when they buy a business, they do it for reasons of financial reward, autonomy, freedom, capture of their own ship, et cetera, et cetera. They get into it and they discover that actually creating a culture and doing right by their team is incredibly motivating. Sounds squishy, sounds like marketing blabber, but they say
totally
with a absolutely does straight face. No, this is incredibly rewarding and motivating to me in a way that it wasn't really on my radar.
Yep.
How do you react to that?
I absolutely resonate to that kind of statement to use them. I'm involved in EO too. And so, resonation and people tell stories. I completely agree. I've always been somebody that loves working with teams, loves working with people. I was a psych major in college. You think I'm not interested in people? I've always been that way. It's tremendously powerful when you know that somebody has your back and it's kind of, and it's mutual. And when we went through the whole exercises of creating the company values as part of the EOS program, we have four. Sorry, really quick. One team, confianza, Spanish word. It means more than confidence. It's like you can count on the people. They're like family. We're better, which is sort of a combination of our continuous improvement sort of mentality, trying to be better than we were last month or last year. And then what's next, which is a combination that we do look forward. And also we have a work ethic. We're not done and waiting for somebody to tell us what to do. We're done and we're saying, hey, what's next? I love those values, and I love, and I will light up and I will talk like a meme or a zealot because I truly believe in them. And I love the fact that there's a Spanish word in there because it absolutely reflects the 75% of our employees that are Spanish speaking. And that was because one of those employees on the leadership team kept saying, confianza. And we said, yeah, confidence. Everyone's confidence. And he's like, no, confianza. And then we started to really understand what that meant. And we said, boy, is that perfect. And everybody on the team, we have to have confianza with each other. And if we do, we can accomplish anything. And I'm so blessed to have those guys and girls.
Fantastic, Michael. We'll leave it there. If people want to reach out to you with a question, do you have a preferred way they do that?
Yeah, M. Kelker at timberlinepallet.com. Timberline Pallet, no S.
And remember, audience, just to have done your homework. And if you ask Michael to get on the phone with you, come with sharp questions and be very respectful of his time. He's a busy man. But you seem like somebody who would help. You've been very helpful. Yes,
I love it.
Go ahead.
No, I love it. I'm where I got to because I've had good mentors and people helping me along the way. Happy to do the same if I can.
Great. Appreciate that, Michael.
Thank you, Will. This has been fun.
Great. It has been. It's been a great interview. Thank you, Michael. Congratulations on your first 4 years, first of many in Timberline, and for bringing so much transparency and the heart as well to the interview and to your project here. So thanks very much.
Sounds great. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.